I've always believed that love, real love, is built on freedom, not constant check-ins, not suspicion disguised as care, just trust. That's what Leonardo and I had. Or at least, that's what I thought. So when he leaned in that evening, kissed me on the cheek and said, "Just grabbing drinks with the guys," I didn't question it. I smiled, told him to enjoy himself, and watched him walk out the door without a second thought. The apartment felt quiet after he left, but not in a lonely way. More like peaceful. I wandered into the kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, poured myself a glass of wine, and let the soft hum of a jazz playlist fill the space. I remember feeling grateful in that moment. Grateful for the kind of marriage where goodbye didn't feel like a gamble. I had no plans, just a cozy night ahead. Maybe a bath. Maybe finishing that novel on the nightstand. But then my phone buzzed. A call from my best friend, Lucia. She sounded giddy, said she'd just wrapped up work early and asked if I wanted to grab dinner. It wasn't planned, but something about the spontaneity made me say yes before I even realized I was grabbing my purse. I slipped on my flats, touched up my lipstick, and stepped out into the warm evening air, completely unaware of what I was about to walk into. Traffic was light, and I rolled the windows down just a bit to let the night air in. The city had that soft glow it gets when the sun's fully gone, but the heat of the day still lingers. Familiar, comforting. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just driving, humming along to the radio. My mind was calm, content. I even remember thinking how nice it was to still feel excitement over a last-minute dinner with someone who knew me better than most. At a red light, I reached over to adjust the volume and happened to glance out the passenger window. That's when I saw it. Leonardo's car, parked across the street. At first, I just blinked. Not shocked, not suspicious. I figured maybe he'd driven one of the guys somewhere, or maybe they'd picked a different bar nearby. But then I looked again, and something in my chest tightened. That license plate, that dent on the back bumper, it was definitely his. I didn't mean to look inside the restaurant next to it. I really didn't. But my eyes moved on their own, like they already knew what was coming. And there he was, sitting by the window. Not surrounded by coworkers, not tossing back beers with the guys. No. He was with a woman, just the two of them, laughing, leaning in. Her hand reached out and touched his arm like it had done that before. And right there, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Thursday night, something in me shattered. But I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, but my face stayed still, like my body hadn't caught up to my heart yet. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease of it. The way he smiled at her, like he hadn't just left our home, like I didn't exist. My pulse was racing, but I felt eerily clear, like everything suddenly snapped into focus. And in that strange clarity, I made a choice. I picked up my phone and called Lucia back. Told her something had come up and that I'd have to take a rain check on dinner. She could hear something in my voice. She asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was. And then I hung up, took a deep breath, and pulled the car into a spot just down the block. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My feet knew exactly where to walk. I wasn't going to wait around for a better time or a more dramatic moment. I stepped out, adjusted my jacket, and made my way toward that restaurant with my head high. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also steadier. This wasn't the kind of thing I ever thought I'd have to do. But somehow, I knew what came next. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want an apology. I just needed him to see me, to feel the weight of what he'd done. Not later, not through guilt, but right there, at that table, with her. The closer I got to the entrance, the louder the world around me seemed to become. The clinking of cutlery, the laughter spilling out the open doors, the hum of conversations blending together. It was surreal. like I was floating just outside of it all, watching myself walk towards something irreversible. I paused by the glass, just long enough to really look. There he was. My husband. The man who kissed me goodbye not even an hour ago. Still smiling. She was laughing at something he'd said. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, her dress snug and carefully chosen. She looked comfortable. Familiar. Like this wasn't their first time. I noticed the way her body tilted toward him, how his fingers grazed the rim of his glass while his eyes lingered on her lips. They weren't co-workers blowing off steam. They were something else. And my heart, oh, my poor, loyal heart, had no choice but to catch up. I don't know what I expected to feel, but what hit me wasn't chaos. It was clarity. Ice-cold clarity. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't even going to call him. What I was going to do was show up. Fully. Intentionally. If he could lie with such ease, then he could answer for it just as publicly. I took one last breath, smoothed down my blouse, and pushed open the door. The host greeted me with a polite smile, asking if I had a reservation. I shook my head and said, "I see my table." He looked confused, but I didn't stop walking. I wasn't looking for permission. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I moved toward them, heart pounding in my chest like it might break free. Leonardo still hadn't seen me. Neither had she. They were too wrapped up in whatever version of reality they'd created for themselves. And then he looked up. For a second, he didn't register what he was seeing. His smile faltered, like he thought I was a ghost. The color drained from his face, and I swear I saw his whole body stiffen. She turned to follow his gaze, slowly, and when her eyes landed on me, confusion spread across her face. She didn't know who I was. Not yet. But she could tell she was about to find out. The air between us thickened instantly. I didn't flinch. I didn't stop. I reached their table, looked straight at Leonardo, and then pulled out the empty chair next to him. My fingers were steady, my voice even. And without waiting for an invitation, I sat down, right next to my husband. Right in the middle of their moment. I crossed my legs, rested my hands gently on my lap, and offered him the kind of smile that says, "Go ahead. Try me." He opened his mouth, probably to say my name, maybe to ask what I was doing there, but I didn't give him the chance. I tilted my head slightly, still smiling, and said, "So, how's drinks with the guys going?" His jaw clenched. The woman looked between us, visibly uncomfortable now, her eyes darting as if trying to piece together the puzzle she clearly wasn't expecting to be part of. Leonardo stammered something about it not being what it looked like. I turned to her, calm as ever, and said, "Hi, I'm Leo's wife. You must be one of the many secrets he keeps when I kiss him goodbye." Her expression twisted. Surprise, guilt, maybe a little anger. But mostly, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Leonardo's face was red. He reached for my hand under the table, a weak attempt at damage control, but I pulled it away before he could touch me. That privilege was gone the moment I walked in. Silence settled over the table like fog. He didn't know what to say. She didn't dare speak. And me? I just sat there letting them sit in it. The truth, the awkwardness, the shame. I didn't need to yell to make my point. I didn't need drama. I just needed them both to feel what I felt when I looked through that window. And right now, they were starting to. But this wasn't the end, not even close. I didn't say another word right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough to become unbearable. Leonardo fidgeted beside me, clearing his throat like that might clear his guilt too. The woman looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, and I honestly didn't blame her. She'd been lied to just like I had, though only one of us had built a life with him. I reached for the glass of water in front of me and took a slow sip, savoring the quiet discomfort. Leonardo finally leaned toward me, voice low, desperate. "Camila, can we talk? Alone?" I turned to him and blinked, feigning confusion. "Why? Isn't this the company you chose tonight?" He tried to whisper something else. Excuses maybe, but I cut him off without raising my voice. "You lied, Leo. Not just to me, but to yourself. And her. You're not a man who made a mistake. You're a man who made a choice." And that, I think, is what stunned him most. My calm. I turned to the woman again, offering her the courtesy he never gave me. "You didn't know, did you?" Her eyes welled up and she shook her head. "No," she said, her voice barely there. "He told me he was separated." I nodded slowly, almost with pity. "Of course he did. He's practiced." Her lip quivered. For a brief second, I saw myself in her. Not in this moment, but in the beginning. Back when I believed him too. She looked down at her hands, visibly shaken, and I felt something unexpected. Not anger, but something closer to sadness. Not for him, for her. For the version of me she'd unknowingly stepped into. I didn't come here to destroy her, and I wasn't going to. I came for clarity. For that rare moment when the curtain falls and everyone sees what's been hiding behind the charm and the promises. Leonardo had nothing left to hide behind now. He tried again, reaching for damage control like it was oxygen. "Camila, please, you're making this worse than it is." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "No, Leonardo, you made it worse. I'm just sitting here." His face twisted in frustration, the mask slipping further by the second. The woman stood up then, slow and stiff, her eyes on me instead of him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know." I nodded. "You do now." There was a beat of stillness, that kind that only happens when everyone's out of words but full of realization. I pushed my chair back gently and stood. Leonardo followed, fumbling to grab his coat, already trailing behind like he could rewrite the night with one good apology. But I wasn't listening. Not to the pleas, the stammering, or the shame he was finally starting to feel. I was done talking. And I wasn't done walking. I walked past the tables, past the waiters who suddenly had too much to do, past the quiet stares that clung to my back like whispers. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I walked the same way I came in, steady, centered, and in control. Behind me, I heard him call my name. Once, twice. But I didn't stop. He had my attention earlier, when he lied to my face with a kiss. This was my exit. Outside, the night air wrapped around me like truth. Cold, bracing, impossible to ignore. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. The betrayal, the theater of it, the woman who now had to unravel her own version of Leonardo. But even in all that heaviness, I felt something else beneath it. Something quieter. Something stronger. Like the first crack of light after a long, dark tunnel. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And as I walked away from the restaurant, heels clicking against the pavement, breath steady, heart sore but beating, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This wasn't the climax. It was only the opening act. Because what he didn't know, what he could never predict, was how quietly a woman can burn everything down when she's done asking questions. He followed me out, of course. That part was predictable. I could hear his steps behind me, uneven, panicked, like a man chasing a version of himself he just realized he lost. "Camila, please, just talk to me." I stopped walking, but I didn't turn around. My voice was steady when I said, "You showed me everything I needed to know tonight." It was strange how calm I felt. Not numb, clear. Like my body had finally caught up to what my heart saw at that table. He tried to spin it, said it didn't mean anything, that he was confused, that things had been off between us lately. The classic script. I'd heard pieces of it before in friends' stories, movies, podcasts. I never thought I'd hear it from my husband. But the thing is, once the illusion breaks, it doesn't glue itself back together with apologies. I looked him in the eyes and said, "This isn't about one lie. It's about how easily you told it." I got in my car without slamming the door, without a single dramatic gesture. He stood there on the curb, still trying to catch up to the version of me that used to beg for honesty. That version was gone. And the silence between us, once so rare, now said everything. I drove home with the windows up, the radio off, and my fingers tapping the wheel with a rhythm I didn't recognize. A quiet, confident rhythm that sounded a lot like freedom. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't cry. I didn't stare at the ceiling asking, "Why me?" I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. If he could live a double life, then I could start building one without him. I started small, checking our accounts, pulling statements, tracing credit card charges. And what I found didn't shock me. There were more nights like last night. Different restaurants, different dates, same man. Piece by piece, the illusion of our life began to dissolve, not with rage, but with receipts. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was working, focused, intentional. I called my cousin Sophia, a real estate attorney who'd always said, "Call me if you ever need to play hardball." I told her it was time. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'm on it." Funny how fast people show up when you stop pretending everything's fine. What Leonardo never bothered to ask about during all those years, the inheritance my grandmother left me before we were even married, turned out to be the one thing that gave me full control over the apartment. It was in my name. Always had been. He never cared enough to notice. That's the thing about men like him. They only see what benefits them, until one day you show them the fine print, and it no longer works in their favor. By the end of the week, the lawyer was hired, the paperwork started, and the locks were changed. I boxed up what was his, carefully, clinically, and left it with the doorman along with a short note. No need to knock. He'd been texting, of course, calling, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between apologies and accusations. But I didn't listen to most of them. I had no interest in the version of me he was trying to reach. She didn't live here anymore. What I felt wasn't revenge. It was reclamation of my time, my space, my voice. For years I'd been so gentle with his ego, so careful not to make waves. And where had it gotten me? Sitting across from a stranger in a restaurant, watching my marriage rot in real time. Not anymore. I wasn't going to fall apart in private while he fell into someone else's arms in public. No. If he wanted drama, he'd have to sit through the kind I scripted myself. And that's exactly what I was preparing. A table, a guest list, a toast. He'd never see it coming, because the thing about quiet women like me is, we don't shout when we've had enough. We set the stage. We wait for the moment. And when it arrives, we make sure everyone has a front row seat. 2 weeks later, my apartment didn't just look different. It felt different. Brighter. Lighter. Not because of new curtains or furniture, but because he was gone. The air had changed. It belonged to me now. And so did the evening I'd planned. I sent out the invitations one by one. Mutual friends, colleagues, even a few of his coworkers who'd once smiled at me like I was just the wife. Not anymore. Now, I was the host, the woman with the keys and the wine glasses. The table was set with care, white linen, polished silver, and the good glasses we'd barely used during the marriage. I cooked most of it myself. Not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to. Every plate, every seat, every candle lit with intention. My playlist played softly in the background. People laughed, passed dishes, toasted to nothing in particular. And just when the night felt warm and whole, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check. I already knew. Leonardo. I let the room go quiet before I opened the door. He stood there, face rehearsed, like he'd convinced himself this was his redemption arc. "Can we talk?" he asked. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled at him. "Of course," I said. "Right this way." He didn't notice the glances exchanged as he walked in. He didn't know this wasn't his stage anymore. He was just a guest, and I was holding the mic. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, eyes scanning familiar faces now painted with polite confusion. He opened his mouth like he was about to launch into some heartfelt speech, maybe the one he practiced in the mirror. But I didn't give him the chance. I gently tapped my glass with a fork and rose to my feet. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. I took a breath, steady and slow, and raised my glass. "To loyalty," I began, letting the word land. "To transparency, and to knowing when to get up from the wrong table." A few people glanced at him, some lowered their eyes. He stood frozen, the smile slowly slipping from his face. And then, without skipping a beat, I reached behind me, picked up the envelope I had set aside, and handed it to him. "This is for you," I said. "I figured if you were going to show up uninvited, you might as well leave with something official." He didn't open it right away, but he didn't have to. The weight of it said everything. The whispers began before he even stepped back. I sat down, calm and unbothered, and returned to my wine. My guests followed my lead. They toasted again, louder this time. The moment had passed, and he had missed his. That was the last time he ever stepped foot in my home. That was the night he learned, I don't chase, I choose. After he left, the air felt different again, clearer, like something toxic had finally been exhaled. The evening went on without a hitch. Laughter returned, glasses clinked. A friend turned to me and whispered, "That was art." And maybe it was. Not out of vengeance, but closure. I didn't need to scream or break plates or post long rants online. I just needed one moment on my terms. And I got it. Beautifully, decisively, and without shedding a single tear. What no one at that table knew, not yet, was that I'd already started turning a new page. It began quietly. A few late calls with my lawyer. One night we stayed talking after business was done. Then coffee. Then dinner. He wasn't dramatic or flashy. He listened. Really listened. And after so many years of shrinking myself to fit into Leonardo's version of love, I had no intention of rushing. But this time it felt mine. And maybe that's what mattered most. That I finally chose the table, the guest list, the seat of honor. No one handed it to me. No man paved the way. I built it, step by step, moment by moment, from the ashes of what used to be us. And as I poured myself one last glass of wine that night, surrounded by warmth, by truth, by people who actually saw me, I realized I wasn't just healing. I was home.